Leadtionary 2023. Live on Facebook at Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei. Every Thursday at 1900 GMT.
Hi, this is Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei, the host of Leadtionary, and I'm excited to welcome you to this very special edition of Leadtionary, the Dictionary of Leadership. Leadtionary offers us the opportunity to be able to talk to people who are practicing leadership, teaching leadership, and are also lifelong leadership students. Now, there are three levels of leadership. From the level of leadership as a leadership practitioner, as a leadership educator, and as a leadership learner. Only few people are able to put all these three into one. And today we have on Leadtionary one of the men in the country who is a leadership practitioner, a leadership educator, and a lifelong leadership student. Let's welcome the CEO and the executive director, the National Cathedral Project, Dr. Paul Opoku Mensah. Doc, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bishop.
I'm excited to have you. I've been wondering, the executive director and the CEO, what is the difference?
I think mostly when the executive directorship mostly refers to the administrative coordination.
Okay.
And then when really you need some executive things done, you use the CEO.
Amazing.
But we normally say executive director is fine.
Amazing. Welcome. You have a very impressive CV. I didn't know that you have a background in executive leadership, education policy, and academia. And your career highlights include a former executive director of Ghana Institute of Linguistic Literacy and Bible Translation. And then you've also gone on to work as a senior policy advisor for USAID. And then you've taught in various universities around the world. You've taught in universities in Norway. You've also been to Johns Hopkins University. An amazing background. Tell us a little about your rise to leadership. I always want to get to know the inspirational stories behind people's rise to leadership.
Okay, thank you very much. And really, let me just say, I'm also excited to be part of this. I didn't know about it, and when I started reading about it, I said, okay, this is long overdue. The idea of actually having a dictionary of leadership, not just in books, but on a live discursive basis. Exciting. So congratulations also for getting this. My journey into leadership is really has been almost providential and based on conviction. I grew up in a home where both my parents have acted in certain leadership positions, not because they wanted to be leaders. There was a problem to be resolved. They were convicted about certain things. So for instance, my mother was the first Ghanaian a technical person to get into Bible translation within the Wycliffe Bible translators. He had finished her education in the UK, University of London, SOAS, and said God was calling her to do Bible translation, and went to stay almost for 20 years in the north. She was in Ashanti, went to, and the people I had seen growing up, one of them was William Oforiatta. And his story says, look, when he was a student, he thought, look, our country needed to be independent, and he dreamt of that, and they were willing to pay the price for it. And throughout my education, you come in contact with leaders, you read about leaders who really wanted to solve a problem, but a problem that was born out of conviction. And so that's how I actually ended up here. The idea of being an academic. I mean, I had always wanted to be an academic. So that for me was not about the issues to work on. It was really issues of transformed Africa. So my academic work really focused on the actors in African development. both the state, the private sector, religious institutions, NGOs, civil society. How do we almost make these actors effective agents of African transformation? But the idea of coming back to Ghana, as part of my research, I really got into the Pan-African intellectual movement. That's when it hits you that you can do all you want in academia and write all you want. It does not transform your continent. You almost have to come and dirty your hands. And that's, so I became restless. And that's when I got the call. In fact, first from my mother, because I had come see what they were doing here and literally told them that, look, the Bible translation movement will collapse because it was so much dependent on resources from the West, both the intellectual resources, the people, as well as the physical, the financial resources. So I used to tell my mother and those who listen, including her friends, that until they were able to shift the orientation of the organization, they will collapse when there's a crisis in the West. And so in 2008, there was a crisis, the financial crisis that hit. And so my mother called me, at the time she was in London, called me and said, Yao, what you predicted has happened. Would you be willing to? And that's when I felt, look, I've written about African ownership. I've written about moving Africa beyond aid. This was a test opportunity. So once again, I came back to Ghana, not because I wanted to be earlier, but I felt that out of conviction.
Which year?
2010.
2010.
So I resigned my professorial position. Just look, I mean, I think people thought I was going through a crisis, midlife crisis. And I said, no. I mean, it's something I wanted to do.
You were an associate professor of which university?
Aalborg University in Denmark. But I also had an adjunct position at the University of Bergen, research coordinatorship.
You left all to come to Ghana?
I did, once again, because you're talking about inspiration. Yeah. The people I have always admired, the William Oforiates, left everything they had. I mean, so that had always, particularly when I became an adult and wanted to understand my own role and place in society, what's my purpose? I was drawn to these people and say, well, these are people who could have made money. My mother could have made money. Pauli could have made money, and yet decided that, look, his life should be about liberating Ghana and really almost providing ethical leadership. So that has always been, and I've been engaging, I'll go back into it, that in terms of inspiration, the leaders I've worked with. And somehow God prepares us for these things. I was being privileged to work both at the intellectual level with some of the leading intellectuals in the US, in Norway, Titi-Ofei, Lester Solomon. And these were people whose leadership was based on conviction. I mean, and almost all the leaders I admire, the great ones, have always been based on conviction. So that's how I came. No, you wanted to come in.
So there are two key words that has come out of your opening statements, and I'd like us to look at them before you even define your leadership. Right. You've mentioned a lot about inspiration, right, and also about conviction. How will you define inspiration in terms of leadership? What is the role of inspiration? How do you get an inspired person, somebody who is an inspiration, to follow?
I think it's at one level, it's really this idea of mentorship, role models. But for me, the idea of inspiration is almost almost a vision of the future. Who really captures your imagination in terms of the vision of the future you want? And so I would say I'm inspired by Nehemiah, for instance, because he really shows you what is possible. Yeah. What that you can actually come, almost mobilize the whole people to do what needs to be done. So that's the inspiration for me, is something that almost captures your imagination, and that then propels you to act.
Yeah. Your mother was in the North for 20 years, right, working as with Bible.
Yeah, so she had to go, she went into the Chokosio Anofo language, she had to learn it. You learn it, you develop the orthography, everything, write the books, the grammar, and then you begin the process of translating the Bible.
Is she still alive?
She is.
She is. Because I'm already inspired by her story.
Yes, I have been inspired by her
I'm
story.
already inspired by her story. I guess the reason why you went with Ghana.
That's why I went there. So that's that kind of leadership that is born out of conviction.
Yeah.
That look, this is what God wants me to do.
So how will you define conviction?
Conviction, it's almost like a restlessness, eh? It's really this restlessness about the certainty of a path. You see, it's this certainty that this is the path that should be taken. Yeah, and it's out of that is birthed a certain restlessness. So you never give up, irrespective of the challenges you and all the people who I've known who've really been leaders of conviction. Whether you put them in prison, whether you deny them certain things, they're still convinced about the path. This is the right direction. And if they have to go through hot water, they still do it. And that, and there have been quite a lot of them. I mean, and we can kind of go into the individuals in Ghana. I mean, I have one of the people I admire quite here is Archbishop Sapong, Kwesi Sapong, and he tells you his life story, and he'd always been convinced that at the heart of the Christian message is incarnation. God became man and dwelt among us, and so Christianity has to be inculturated. He didn't mind whether the Pope was going to defrock him. He was going to ensure that Christ was an Asante man.
A firm belief in the pursuit of a certain dream.
Direction, yes.
Firm belief. Amazing.
And the willingness to sacrifice for it.
Amazing.
I mean, the willingness. And you have that.
Your leadership of the National Cathedral has come to light. It's more or less the National Cathedral has become politically colored, based on conversations that is going on. And so what is keeping you here? Conviction?
It's conviction. I mean, I think...
Because reading your background, you can just walk out of this place today and land yourself a good job tomorrow.
It is conviction, once again. It's a conviction. In fact, and let me get you back to the Gilbert.
Yeah.
So when I came back to Ghana, and I said, okay, if I was coming, and I gave them, still like, if you want me to come, this is my vision of this organization, the direction it should take. One, it has to move from being a foreign-initiated missionary organization to a national organization. And that means that you're going to anchor the work in the national context, link up with the churches, Ghanaian institutions, develop Ghanaian expertise. And so when I came back, that's what I did. Change the governance structure and says, look, we bring the church leaders. If you're doing Bible, it has to be the church. Brought in the university, so we formed a new board. And then I said, look, where are the Ghanaian Christian businessmen? Because that orientation had to shift. And so I was introduced to Reverend Kobna Dako and the finance minister then, who was then a businessman, Christian businessman. So I went to them and said, look, for 200 years, our Bibles have been produced, funded by foreigners. Ghanaians are the stage, Africans are the stage where we can be responsible for this work. And so I put them together, and they became almost, they were willing to mobilize. And so that's where this conversation started. And I said, look, I came back because I was convinced that where we are, really inserting the values of the Bible into our society was where this country needed to go. And so the issue of putting God at the center of, so that was my conviction. So coming, yes, at one level, I wanted to see the organization become a national organization, but my interest really was on the fact that it also dealt with the Bible. And I was convinced, in fact, as an academic, one of the things that I did was to write on religion and the whole idea of the church in Africa. So I convened quite a number of international conferences and came out with this conviction that the future of our country and the African continent really would depend heavily on the role of the church. So for me, the organization, Gilbert, or no, I was doing was really almost kind of testing out that theory. And part of that, I felt also had to be at the national level. And at the national level, we needed to put God at the center of our national life. In fact, we needed to almost correct our original sin, which was that we were supposed to seek ye first the political kingdom. I felt that it might be a political statement, but it really was symbolic.
Okay.
And if as a country we're willing to repudiate that and say that, look, we are going to put God at the center, seek him first, then the incentives, the conditions will change for our transformation. And this was not, for me, it was not academic. I sincerely believed in that. And that is how I actually got into the National Cathedral, that we needed to do something symbolic for this country. And it had to be at the level, almost world-class level. And out of that conversations, I remember February 2017, I went to Dubai with my daughter. She wanted to go for holidays. I wanted to just go there because I had been fascinated by Sheikh Zayed, who developed the UAE. And I went to the Grand Mosque. And I don't know if you'll be there. Fascinating. I mean, it's now the second most visited religious site in the Middle East after Mecca. Before that, it was nothing, 2007. And what he had written there, Sheikh Zayed, was that he was building this as a thanksgiving to God for his blessings on his people. So I remember I came back almost convinced that this was the time for Ghana to do something like that.
That's right.
So I went to see the finance minister, and I said, look, you know you guys have struggled so much to come to power. This is the time to make this symbolic thing for the country, that we can insert God. And he said, Paul, you have no idea. The president also wants us to build a national cathedral. So that's how, and then I remember at the time I was trying to build capacity for Ghanaian consultants because they were telling them that Ghana doesn't have Bible translation consultants. And I asked, why are we so dependent on external, and they said biblical Hebrew training. So I had convened an international conference on Bible translation and had argued that the key to really African ownership of Bible translation was biblical Hebrew training. And so there was this organization in Israel that says, look, who can be willing to organize something for you? So we went to see it. I wanted Reverend Daku to come. We went and had organized quite a significant institution that would do that. I was there when the National Cathedral was launched on March 6, 2017. So I was actually not in the country. And I think the day after I was watching it over the internet, and it just hits you that as a Christian who believes fundamentally that the future of this country would be better if we inserted Christian values. And here I'm not talking about imposing Christianity as the religion of the state. I'm talking about the values of the Christian faith, that if we could really, and so I felt that a national cathedral, as was being proposed, really could be the instrument through which then we begin to introduce these values. So when I came back, I wanted to report the trip. That's a good trip. They are willing to offer Ghana a number of people to train them. So this intensive biblical Hebrew training program, which they did. So at the moment, now we've trained so many Ghanaian Bible translation consultants who are now being sent outside the country. I mean, so we're able to actually change this complete dependence on foreign. So once we are discussing that, I said, look, Ken, when I was watching the inauguration, the sword cutting for the cathedral, what was running through my mind was about the future of this country and the fact that this could be a platform around which the values, and I really want to stress that for me, it's about the values. Because sometimes when people hear about the National Cathedral, say, why are you trying to impose Christianity on the nation? We are not imposing Christianity. We are talking about certain values that have helped the kind of societies we admire. And then he said, look, I was also thinking about the same thing. So I said, look, I could help in the ideas because that's where my strength as a leader comes from. And when we get into that my strength in a leader is really at the conceptual level. really the ability to define. And I think the role,
I call that evolutionary leadership.
Okay.
Where you are able to develop a concept from the
Right.
and grow it into a.
And I think that's what I have brought to the cathedral. Yeah. The idea of, look, a religious infrastructure and secular democracy. How do you make that relevant? And so that the intellectual leadership is really what, and you ask me what keeps me here. I think it's really this almost restlessness and conviction that.
So you think conviction should be at the center of every leadership pursuit?
The most effective ones I admire. And I think, so once again, I want to be very, very careful that I don't want to generalize, but if you ask me about effective leadership, the ones I have, is whether it is Jesus Christ, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, whether it is Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Kwame Nkrumah. I mean, really, at the heart of it is just
whatever they did was conviction.
Conviction that.
So, having seen all this, you've seen academic leadership, you have been in spiritual leadership.
Right.
Now you are in public leadership,
right,
offering public service to your country. How will you define leadership? What would be your personal definition of leadership?
I think for me, leadership is really the capacity to influence the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions of others. I mean, so it's really about the heart of it is influence. And that's influencing the way people think, the way people feel, and the way people act. Because if you cannot influence people to do things differently, if you cannot influence them to think differently, and if you cannot influence them to feel differently, I'm not too sure you are an effective leader. So that influence really for me is at the heart of leadership. And that influence must almost lead to, it must have a response from your followers. I mean, so you can't have a leader whose followers don't respond to his influence.
But to do this, leaders must build capacity.
Exactly.
They must build personal capacity to do
right.
it.
Exactly.
So how do leaders build capacity?
Right. In my own case, I mean, first, one is to be a student of leadership. I mean, I think the first, almost at the base of capacity is almost knowledge, both the intellectual, the analytical, so really understand. And there, one, you can study at the feet of a leader. And one of the things I have done is really engage as many leaders as possible, and some physically, some through books. But I've argued that I want to be the largest kind of library on autobiographies. And I have quite a significant number already. And that has been my way of almost communicating, engaging with some of the leaders I've felt were the most effective. Some we did not meet, but we have the ideas. We have, and of course, the other one is just going for training. I mean, these days, and what you are offering, these days there are tools that those before we didn't have. We have quite a significant number of training programs available. But we also have mentorship. I've been lucky to, they didn't call it mentorship, but they took you under their arms and you were learning.
Built you, yeah?
Sometimes it was not conscious. I mean, you were just working for them. I remember you talked about, in your interview with Professor Samojedu, he talked about this man that he used to serve.
That's right.
And I have done that. In fact, I remember one of the people I really admire, most people were saying he was my, Professor Titi-Ofei's servant. They used to call me when I was doing my PhD. Yeah. But I found him so fascinating in his leadership. I mean, every year he comes out with a book that changes the thinking in Norway. He's called Norway's leading public intellectual.
Yeah. So one of the keys to building capacity is through service.
It's the willingness to serve.
So I call that follower-ship.
Okay.
How I believe that one of the most effective and efficient ways to learn leadership is to follow.
Absolutely. And I agree with you.
It's to follow a leader better than you. You will have to put at the disposal of that leader your skills, abilities, and service to that leader. In turn, that leader shares something that you won't find in any book.
Absolutely.
What is your whole concept about followership? Because we talk a lot about leadership, but less on followership. What? So Pastor Manjudu spoke about it. You are also talking about it as part of building capacity.
Right.
What would you call as followership, and how do we follow?
I think it starts with the almost acknowledgement that you do not know. I mean, I think it's almost this almost understanding that it's not that you lack capacity, but I think it's just this idea that at the heart of you being an expert is to, I mean, we talk about the fact that Newton talks about the fact that he's been able to look far because he stands on the shoulders of giants. And so it's that, and I think biblically, the example of Elisha and Elijah almost provides this concept. You serve, you because you really want to understand, to take as much from them. So it's one starts from a certain level of humility, that's almost recognition that to really be able to be an effective leader, you have to learn from those who have gone ahead of you. There's something Hini said something last week that I was fascinated by. He says, he was advising one of the chiefs, and he says, let me use the tree and I'll translate it. He said, "I what that for me titi also. We are and ma wahini no ejina." And it's almost a contradiction in terms. That to be a leader,
English translation.
the English translator literally means to be an effective leader, to be a respected leader. You almost have to really lower yourself to the level where you are willing to be stepped on. In the chieftaincy institution, it means ukosum. I mean, you really serve, but it's out of that service that then the leader imparts. And sometimes the impartation is not even conscious. It doesn't sit you down to lecture you. But in the way he allows you the access.
Yeah.
See, there's a certain level of access that a leader allows you when he trusts. You are not there to undermine him, you are there to serve him. So almost in their unguided moments, they allow you to almost also see their vulnerabilities. They open up everything for you. And so that's why Elisha would be able to say, I want a double portion of what you have. Because you're able to see, and you develop a certain trust relationship.
Amazing. So far, you've spoken about inspiration as key to leadership development and growth. You've spoken about conviction. You've spoken about capacity. And you've spoken about followership as keys to becoming an effective leader. I have observed you provide leadership to the National Cathedral Project. This is really a very difficult terrain to lead because of how politically tainted it has become. How different is it in leading within this terrain? You have led in other places. What leadership styles, what leadership convictions, what leadership types do you need to be able to provide leadership under such circumstances?
Okay. I think the first really is the conviction of vision. I mean, I think that for me, the vision thing is trumps everything. Once you are setting that the vision of the National Cathedral is what this country needs, and not only this country, we've almost expanded that to almost say that this can be at the heart of our transformation, that we can actually use the National Cathedral to develop Ghana into Africa's Christian metropolis. And with that, you really then can be able to almost make Ghana a site for religious tourism, So beyond kind of the sacred infrastructure for the nation, the symbolic representation of God in our nation politics, the platform for Christian unity, it's also really this idea of the National Cathedral as a platform, as an agency for transforming our society. So that for me is, if you're asking about how do I lead, it's the certainty that the cathedral can do this. I think for me, that's the certainty that the country needs this, and it can be done. The other one really has been almost to lead this one area in which you lead indirectly. It's not, there are areas in which you lead directly. I mean, so in an academic setting, you have some ideas, it's direct. This is how I want it to go. In the Gilberts, you are the executive director, they accepted your vision, this is the way to go. And the National Cathedral, I think I was naive enough to think, so that's the learning part of it. I was naive to think you could just come in and run with your vision. This was a different animal because you're dealing with some key segments of society. I mean, you're dealing with politics, and really this is a presidential project. I mean, so it was not your vision. They could ask you, okay, what is your implementation vision? And which I did, I provided. My vision was to ensure that we transformed through the National Cathedral, we turned Ghana into Africa's Christian metropolis. So that was my implementation vision of implementation. But the vision of the cathedral was somebody else's, the president's. And then he had also selected a board. I came in almost about 6 months after the board was in. I came in November 2017. So he also came to meet whole leadership for the project. And then you had others, so you had to come and set up a secretariat. So that leadership almost was something that you were going to do almost through the normative power of your example. One was intellectual. You had to almost be able to define the project, operationalize it in ways that was acceptable to all these key constituents. It took some time to do that because different people understood the National Cathedral differently. So some of those you had to almost put it into the present writing about the nature of the project, the fact that it was also going to be a convening platform. Those you could not come and just, like if I was the executive director of Gilbert, what I could have done, you couldn't do it here. Because you're dealing with some leaders who had well-established leaders, even at the religious level. I mean, some of the key leaders, Archbishop Duncan Williams, Bishop, I mean, these are not people you just come and these are leaders. And so you had to convince them. And so the intellectual part, the normative part, the conceptual part was very, very important. I remember I spent almost the first time, I spent about 5 hours with the chairman of the board, who was Most Reverend Santientri. And then after that, he said, young man, I'm sold. You have my blessings. I like this vision. But once again, in other places, once you convince the board chairman, your work is done. It was different here because even among the board, there were peers. This is a board of peers. It was not a board where the chairman could just run roughshod over the leader. So that has been the challenge. But at the same time, I think that's also for me has been the exciting part. The ability to put together a project that combines the state, the church, the private sector. It was going to be a difficult proposition.
And full soldier.
Exactly. And which also was in a context of a highly politicized, I mean, really, and almost a highly divisive political environment, a polarized society, one. And then you also had really a very highly denominationalized church landscape. So in a sense, and here I'm not making excuses at all, in a sense, it was going to be a challenging project. And then the funding model, I mean, I think was the most challenging because projects of this nature always have their challenges. I mean, people don't agree, but normally when you have the funding, you can move on. And then the critiques, but after some time, when you finish, people understand, oh, okay, this is what we're talking about. But in our context, the president was adamant that, look, he wanted this to almost, the implementation or the funding model should be different. He really wanted Ghanaian Christians to be part of funding this. And then the project is located within this highly polarized political environment, highly denominationalized. So, and the same people who have not really come to a consensus on the project are being asked to fund it. So those are the challenges.
It will be a very complex environment to lead.
Right.
When we come back from the break, Dr. Opoku Mensah will be answering questions along the lines of criticisms, how to respond to them, how to listen as a leader, and how to lead leaders. Because his job here is that he's leading leaders that probably have led several years before he started leading. We'll come back and we'll discuss that. God bless you. Thank you for watching.
Leadtionary 2023, live on Facebook at Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei, every Thursday at 1900 GMT.
Hi, this is Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei. I am the official senior pastor for all pastors and leaders under 40. You know, in September, I am locking down all pastors and leaders under 40 in a 3-day boot camp dubbed Lockdown. You see, there will be no phone calls, no social media, no contact to the outside world. Just 3 days between you, myself, and Jesus in a lockdown leadership boot camp. We are praying every day. We are studying the word every day. We are fasting every day. Life will change. Jesus will visit you. Your ministry will change. At the Sheepfold Prayer Chamber near Accra Business School off the Sprinters Road in Accra. Call the numbers on the screen now or go to the link provided and register. This is your chance to revive your ministry, your chance to get back on track. Listen, God has given me a special message for you, and God will visit you. I look forward to having you. Remember, it is lockdown September 20th to 22nd September. Arrival is on Tuesday evening, 19th September at 5 p.m. Free accommodation provided. So, you know something? It's a dormitory style accommodation. So come with your bed sheets and other things. But we will provide you mattresses. And, it's going to be a time in the Lord. I enjoy the 2 previous ones we have had been blessing to many ministries. We keep receiving their testimonies. And I want you to be blessed as well. God bless you.
Leadtionary 2023, live on Facebook at Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei, every Thursday at 1900 GMT.
Welcome back to Leadtionary, the dictionary of leadership. Dr. Opoku Mensah is taking us on a very inspirational journey of leadership. I'm learning a lot. We've spoken about inspiration. We've spoken about conviction. We've spoken about capacity. And now we want to talk about, so you are leading the cathedral that has received a lot of criticisms. How do leaders respond to such criticisms? You have to listen, ask feedback, and you have to respond. How do leaders manage?
I think first of all, really to be able to deal with criticism effectively, is this, once again, the idea of conviction for me has been very, very important. Secondly, has been the models I've looked up to, and my model of leadership is Nehemiah. Nehemiah's approach to criticism really, there's a part in which you have to respond. There's a part in which is this criticism valid? And then if it's not valid, he says, look, what you're saying is not true. You are fabricating it, so I'm not going to respond. In fact, I'm focused on a great project. I'm not going to respond. So there are elements of all that. So there are parts in which we've not responded. The part in which we've had to respond by providing the information. It means that there's been a significant element of that where there really has been a misunderstanding of the nature of the project. And so our job has been to ensure that we've provided documentation given to the key actors who would then go on to explain. Because there was a period in which even who should communicate on the National Cathedral project was a problem. I mean, among the key actors, we had to determine, so I remember some of the actors would say, no, you shouldn't speak. Let the church leader speak. And someone says, no. So it actually took this crisis. And so we came in and says, look, most of the issues around which the questions are being asked, I don't know vision at all. The implementation issues, the procedural issues. That is the secretariat that has the capacity to respond to this. Because we are doing the day-to-day routine work. So it actually even took some time for there to be consensus that some of the issues are really implementation issues. So it's no longer defending the worth of the project. There was that early period where does the church need a national cathedral? Does the country need a national cathedral?
You've gone past that?
We have to go past that because now some of the criticisms are actually procedural. Did they follow procurement rules? Are there conflict of interest? So those are more procedural, operational issues that needs the response of the secretariat. I think we are now there because there was a period where there was quite, and once again, not that anybody wanted to deceive Ghanaians. It was just simply different people had understood the project differently. We had operationalized. And I think that's, I was explaining to the leadership of the Christian Council that what we had was almost two worlds, the world of prophecy and the world of policy. In the world of prophecy, God speaks to his servant, the prophet, and then you implement. In the world of prophecy, everything is debated, contested. And so we had to almost get church leaders to be able to operate within that. So sometimes we think that people criticizing are all against the cathedral. I'm saying, no, it's actually the normal part of policy. That things must be interrogated. When the president says something, it's not the world of prophecy where God has given a word to his prophet. And so the followers just simply, in here, when the president, in a multi-party democracy, when the president says something is contested, he's described as a fool who doesn't know what he's talking about. And so the National Cathedral had to go through that. So I think...
How are you navigating between the two worlds? How are you navigating between the world of prophecy, the world of prophecy, which you, as a Christian leader, believe that placing God at the center of our national discourse, like building a national cathedral, will help grow this nation, will bring the blessings of God upon this nation. And then the world of policy. How are you navigating the two? More or less, if you are supposed to defend this project, but politicians are making policy decisions, and those policy decisions are reflecting on your prophetic role. How do you, as a leader, navigate between these two worlds?
First, I think you have to be able to define and manage the project in the ordinary language of nation building. So in other words, you almost have to begin to define and explain the project within the national context, within the world of policy. Because at the end of it all, it is the nation being called upon to build the National Cathedral. And so what we've done has, one, been able to almost describe the national project in terms or in the ordinary language of nation building. Two, we've had to integrate elements that really appeal to the world of policy. To the world of policy, integrating God, okay, fine, but look, tell me how it's going to create jobs. Tell me how it's going to transform this country. And so that part of the things we've done, integrating what you're calling an economic engine, introducing a 350-seater restaurant, integrating this spaces, a 1,000-seater banquet hall, Bible museum that we hope will attract. It's really one of the ways of almost bridging this gap between the world, because the world of policy really looks at impact. It's really cool. Look, okay, fine, I understand. I also go to church and everything, but Paul, my constituency is saying that they need hospitals. So why are we building another church? So that really has been the other way of managing by really integrating elements that also appeal to the world of policy. The third one has almost been to build a coalition within policy itself, to really understand what the role of this. So the church has its own understanding. The church, we have the board of trustees whose job is to interpret this theologically. So the whole theological understanding of God in the midst and Solomon's prophetic prayer, so the church understands that. But when you're spending $250 million in the policy world, in a HIPIC country, that doesn't sell too much. So then you have to focus on the elements of the project that we've consciously integrated. So that's why I says, look, I came in here, first, yes, as a Christian, I understood that, but I also understood that what the church has done. If you look at Max Weber talks about the Protestant ethic, it's not that introduce just God, but introduce certain values that allow the West to develop, to transform itself. And so much as I think that the cathedral inserting God is critical, it also had to have the elements that will allow the country to be transformed. I think part of the communication has not been effective at getting Ghanaians to really understand that other part of the value addition, of the economic transformative part of it, the if you can call it. I hate to use this tourist development, because for me, a cathedral is not just a tourist attraction. It almost trivializes what we are trying to do. But at the same time, we also develop it in ways in which we can turn Ghana into a major religious site, where then we can be able to generate resources to satisfy the policy world.
Some people think the whole process was not consultative enough, and that there are key charismatic leaders who, by their leadership, have been able to more or less build communities and build mega cathedrals. And if probably they were consulted, they would have given some advice that would have helped us build these national cathedral without incurring this cost. So what do you think the lack of consultation contributes to leadership success or failure?
There are two, in my views, if you, Margaret Thatcher used to say that in her cabinet, she doesn't go to the cabinet to have internal discussions. She has a vision. And so there are two ways of saying this. One is to say, look, there are certain projects, decisions where the vision is set and you implement because there's a time element. But in this particular case where you also want the same people to contribute, yes, so the element of consultation then becomes very, very critical. And I think that's the president's intent in setting up the Board of Trustees was that it was going to start this process of really consultation, building a platform around which you can really bring in, because I think one of the key strengths of this project is the fact that it could actually tap into the resources of the church. And as you're saying, look, we have church leaders who have built global brands. I mean, they've built churches here that have global reach. And so that we have quite enough capacity to be able to bring to bear on this project. And I still think that's the ideal. We still have to have
These leaders have the capacity to mobilize resources.
Absolutely.
What they have done, what
Absolutely.
Church of Pentecost has done, what Bishop Dag and his United Denominations, what they have done
and
around the world.
I mean, all of you have done.
What
I mean, really.
Istuadaba is doing in the north is amazing. What Ajinasari is doing here, what Bishop Taki, your boy, and all of them, look at what Dr. Mensah Watermill is doing around the country, the kind of churches built under his ICGC, you know, the skills in mobilizing resources, these leaders. Why are we struggling there?
You see, that's in fact, part of the reason why I was even asked to do this was exactly what you, because I says, look, part of the strength of Ghana is the presence of all these leaders, church leaders, I mean, who literally have built, I hate to use the word mega churches. It's actually, they've built effective, really solid, effective organizations. The challenge in such a context also, at least the initial challenge, is that these are almost empire builders. Empire builders have a focus. I mean, and the idea is how to create a platform for collective action among such leaders. It's always a challenge. In fact, so if you look at the history of empire building, it's almost been through cohesion. You studied in Germany, if you look at Otto von Bismarck. It didn't just go and preach to, they used sword and iron to create the German Union. So that there's a level at which to be able to create that platform for collective action, it will take some time, because here, unlike Germany under Otto von Bismarck and the Chancellor, you really can't go and force people to do it. Unlike the Ashanti Empire, Setutu come in and says, look, we have to form a union, and if you don't, so it was not a union of really kind of, it was not just persuasion. In ours, you really have leaders who've created institutions, autonomous institutions, and so you really have to have a process that then is persuasive enough. And I think that, given that, and also the process of even getting the state and the church to work together has been a much more kind of messier process. But I think that's still the aspiration. That is still the ideal. In fact, so we've already had this group of church leaders who've come up with a report. So it's how do you ensure that you actually create a governance structure that allows you to tap into the expertise of all this.
You're speaking about what they have done. I even forgot to mention Tom Crunchy Oil Dome.
Exactly.
And what he's doing.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
I mean, that for me, when I say that we can turn Ghana into Africa's Christian metropolis, it's because of these people, what you've done. I mean, because the elements, a metropolis builds on institutions. You have the cultural institutions here, you have this. So all the elements are in place because you have all these leaders who've created this vibrant ministries that have global reaches. The challenge really then is, how do you get these leaders to work collectively? I mean, that has always, if you look at the history of nation building, that has always been a very, fraught process. Insisting that has to be one of the things. So at the moment, on a quiet side, we're actually visiting all the church leaders. We're almost one-on-one. The board, we're visiting the church leaders. Because I think part of the challenge also of this is that the church is also located within the polarized political environment in which we are. I mean, it's not a normative statement. It's just simply, that's the nature of our society. That in every church, you also have the different political traditions, the polarization in the church. And so there's a certain level at which even church leaders have to be very, very careful. They've built these global brands, and they want to be sure that the process to which they are subscribing is one that will not disturb that equation in their churches. I'm confident that even as we, both the church leaders, the board begins to really one-on-one with their peers, and as we begin to almost demonstrate the use of the cathedral. In fact, if you, this whole discussion about collective action, and that to be able to do that, one, you have to be able to provide incentives. People must see, okay, what is in the cathedral for me as a church leader? And then, or you have an institutional patron who then says, look, I can fund this whole process. And so most of these big projects, collective action projects, would have a patron who will come in. And in my own understanding, in the Ghanaian context, at least to begin with, the state was the patron. In fact, that is why the concept of seed money that I proposed that the state provided the initial funding that would allow us to do the basic foundational work. Because without that, without this institutional patron, it's almost impossible. Because it was not an organized church where you already had institutions, everything. And so that's the initial work I did, operationalizing the vision, but also looking at the implementation and just look, the formula they had provided that you just go and raise money, it's not work. You have to introduce the element of an institutional patron who then provides the seed money.
So your board of trustees are really made up of people who have led for so many years, have achieved a lot. How do you lead leaders like this? What skills do you need to have to be able to lead leaders like this?
First, you have to be knowledgeable you must have to have cognitive legitimacy. And some will call it expertise. That these are people who've led. They're not. So they'll see through you if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. So that I think the first element is really this cognitive legitimacy, that you understand the role of this project, the role of, if you said, a national cathedral, what it's going to do in the nation. You must be able to articulate that. You must be able to understand what you're saying. So the cognitive legitimacy is just, it's basic. To be able to lead. And somehow, at least from the feedback I've gotten, I think that's almost what has been appreciated, that you've brought in analytical skills that almost makes the cathedral intelligible and what it could achieve.
I've heard you several times speaking. I think I really don't doubt your capacity as a leader. I think you've done very well for yourself, and your diplomacy, your demeanor, having seen you being confrontational to even those that are very critical of how this project is going. I think it's very commendable. How do you become a diplomat in the midst of such a chaotic leadership environment?
So the one is the kind of the conceptual kind of this cognitive legitimacy. The other one is a certain almost level. I don't want to use the word humility, but I think a level of appreciation that, look, even for the historic opportunity to be part of this project, I think that's acknowledgement. You see this as, you could have used anybody, really. And so that makes you almost humble enough.
Do you feel like the chosen one? Like God had this plan for Ghana from the foundations of the earth, and you are the chosen one to lead?
I think I'm privileged to be part of that. The concept of the chosen one is dangerous. You see, that's when you have this messianic ambitions. You think that nobody can correct you. And I feel privileged. I think I feel that my experiences, partly one. As I said, part of my conviction, and it still remains why I'm doing this. That the future of our country can be guaranteed by the church. I mean, it's not something, it's not intellectual, it's really deeply that 70% of our population can really change the direction of our country. The National Cathedral allows us that platform to mobilize that 70%. So that conviction really, but there's also a little, I mean, I remember once there was this program and a certain lady came to me and says, look, I've been praying for you. And says, and somehow God wants me to tell you this, that irrespective of who signed your appointment letter, it's God who wanted you to do this. That had a complete, I mean, I think that is, it changes.
Yeah. So I was looking at the chosen one more from the positive angle, that you may have to have a certain spiritual conviction that God wanted you to do this, to be able to stay calm in the midst of chaos. Okay, just before we end this whole interview, amazing conversation, amazing conversation. I think probably we should have chapter 2 of it. So a young man was asked if he was attending church, and he said no. And then they asked, it's a viral video, they asked him why. He said because his church is still being built. And then the follow-up question, where is your church? And he said, my church is the National Cathedral. So many people are waiting to start going to church after the National Cathedral is completed. Do you have timelines? When are you completing the National Cathedral? Your last words.
The timeline is really dependent on the church leaders committing to this. I mean, the funding model, once again, the president is adamant that the state should not be the institution that completely builds it. That in a country where 70% of our people are Christians, the church must contribute. I also believe that. So our ability to complete this in time really is dependent on mostly, I'll throw it back at you. So, when would you mobilize enough Christians?
So that guy should wait until we...
But at the same time, we are really looking at different options of really raising the resources. The noise hasn't helped us. In fact, I remember some of the key people in the US who were willing to support this were coming to Ghana to look at the sites last year, July. That's when all this noise. So the noise has not been too helpful, but I think somehow God in his own infinite wisdom allowed it to happen. At the moment, we believe that if we're able to raise, we are in constant communication with the contractors. I mean, I think God has been quite gracious. They've also stayed calm, are willing to kind of renegotiate all their so-called interests and everything and almost wipe it off. If we get that, we still are convinced that we should be able to have something, at least the sanctuary, completed by the end of next year. I mean, if we get the resources, but this is a mega project. Other elements will be added. In fact, almost normally you complete a project and then you add the other additions. But we want to focus on the sanctuary itself. We're really hoping that as the communication is more focused on the contributions of the cathedral, the church in its leadership, really. And I'm almost encouraged. The church, there are new leaders coming up now. And as you know, the collective action, even through the communication networks, is very difficult. Yeah. It's really, it's very easy to do a denominational thing. If you look at the Ecumenical Christian Council, there's always the challenge for us is really to have the church leadership like you beginning to almost have faith in the project. Again, we're going through an audit process. We've always insisted that there's been no criminality in this project, none at all. I mean, and as that becomes more obvious and the confidence is restored by our church leaders, I'm confident that we'll build this. But I've never doubted that this project will be done. I mean, I think I'm inspired by the stories in the Bible, whether it's Zerubbabel or Nehemiah. It will be done. But it must be done in a way that unites the church. Does not really divide us. And also it must be done in a way that glorifies God. I mean, it must edify this nation. And that's why you ask, why don't we respond sometimes? We just feel that sometimes if we respond, we're just going to further polarize the country. It's not edifying enough. And so sometimes as a Christian, as a leader, you almost have to accept to be battered just because ultimately the glory of God must be what we should be working towards, and the edification of our nation. And for that, yes, we must be willing to accept insults, and it's almost a very, very small price to pay for the kind of pioneering work you guys have done. I mean, and really, when the charismatic movement started, the insults you guys had, it's nothing to compare. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think once we do that, it's almost about the whole leadership. You have to model it. I mean, we have to align it. If we say that Jesus was willing to be humiliated for us, then as a Christian leader, I mean, as a leader who's a Christian, you also have to be able to have that thick skin to be able to withstand. You can't be reacting. I've heard some leaders who say, we don't know how we are suffering because of this cathedral. I felt a bit sad about that.
Yeah.
Really, because I think if this is a thing of we're building for God, none of us should feel that we are suffering for it. At least I don't. I really feel it's still, I mean, what the people I admire, the leaders I admire, have gone through. This is it's almost nothing. And as a leader, one has to be willing to sacrifice. I mean, I think that we didn't talk about that, but really the element of aligning, what you believe in, and really being able to withstand the sacrifice for it is quite, is part of what builds your legitimacy as a leader.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc, for making time.
Thank you for
speak to us.
allowing me to engage in this. I appreciate this very much.
I look forward to speaking to you again. It's been Dr. Paul Opoku Mensah, CEO, National Cathedral Project, sharing his thoughts on leadership. We've learned a lot today, and we look forward to speaking to him again. I will speak to you. I'll bring another great leader to discuss leadership with us next week, same time, same day, on the same platform. God bless you, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
Leadtionary 2023, live on Facebook at Bishop Gideon Titi-Ofei, every Thursday at 1900 GMT.